Welcome to Bits and Bytes Live, the series of short conversations where we talk to experts in the industry about stories of the day through the lens of a communication service provider. My name is Nigel Stevenson. I'm Director of Market Development for VMware in our Service Provider and Edge business unit. And today we're going to extend the conversations we've been having in the past about vRAN and the operator side of the fence. And we're going to go on to the customer premise and look at private mobile networks and what that means both to the enterprise and potentially to the communication service provider. And to have that conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by Gilad Garon, who is CEO of ASOCS. Welcome, Gilad. Delighted to have you here with your experience, especially of the enterprise environment. And Ram, also from the Service Provider and Edge business unit at VMware, who is our Senior Director of Solutions and works specifically with partners such as ASOCS in putting together customer-facing solutions as part of an ecosystem that can then help bring these to market. So, as I say, today we're going to look at the private mobile network, what it means to an enterprise, what an enterprise can expect, how do we build that network, what role a service provider might play. And to kick the conversation off, Ram, I'd like to ask you, if you could, just to set the scene from a technology perspective. So when we talk about a private mobile network, what do we actually mean as a technology, and why that technology versus technologies we may have used in the past for local area networks and so on?
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nigel, and glad to be with you again, Gilad. Nice to meet you again. So, Nigel, that's a very important and pertinent question in today's day and age. So if you look at most of the enterprises, be it a manufacturing industry or be it utilities or be it even an hospitality industry, we are seeing a plethora or explosion of connected devices, be it machines or sensors in the case of industry scenarios, or even in the utilities, or also even in the case of healthcare with all those equipments which are going to be connected devices. One of the key requirements is to be able to provide a reliable communication fabric for all those connected devices. In the past, people have either resorted to using a wired network or in some cases Wi-Fi as the primary modes of connectivity. But one of the problems that we have had in either of those scenarios is the complexity of the deployment, or in the case of Wi-Fi, it's the reliability of the underlying network, right? So that's the key element that mobility brings to the table, right? It gives you a reliable communication mechanism, which is also secure, by the way. Like many of these use cases, like utilities and industry 4.2 kind of use cases, security is a very, very critical aspect. Right from the device all the way to the processing center, you need to have a secure mode of communication, secure channel of communication. So mobility or mobile networks provides that functionality out of the bat. Right, and what 5G adds to the table is a enhancement in three specific dimensions. Right, one is on the mobile broadband in terms of speed. Both the uplink and downlink speeds are far, far higher than the previous generation of technology, which we are popularly calling it as either 4G or LTE networks. Right, so 5G enhances the bandwidth capabilities of the devices. And the second key area where 5G provides additional enhancement is in the aspect of latency. Right, if you look at LTE or 4G, the minimum latency that it can support is about 50 to 100 milliseconds, whereas with 5G technologies, with the right set of radio units and RAN units, you can bring it down to as low as 2 milliseconds, if not 5 to 10 milliseconds in most use cases. Right, so that's the second dimension. And this is extremely helpful for use cases like warehouses, or even in some cases of drone farming kind of a scenario where you're going to have multiple drones to be controlled simultaneously. The third dimension where 5G is helpful is in an ability to manage hundreds of thousands of devices. Particularly, even if you take a car today, the car has thousands of sensors in every single location, right? I mean, it's just a small piece of equipment, but it has thousands of sensors. So now, if you want to connect them all on a mobile network, then you need to have a system that kind of supports the underlying technology should be able to support that plethora of devices. So these are the three main dimensions: bandwidth, latency, and the pure density of devices. So now when you want to bring this mobile network, which is typically designed for a macro network use case, and if you want to bring it down to inside the enterprise, then there are certain things that we need to adopt or modify in order to fit an enterprise use case, right? The primary thing that comes to the mind is simplicity in configuration and day-to-day operations. Like in the macro network, you have so many knobs, so many configuration profiles that you can think of. Whereas in an industry environment, industry enterprise setup, it's a much more condensed or tightly defined environment. That's point number one. And point number two, now you're talking about your IT administrators who are not necessarily conversant with mobile technology. So how do you simplify this complicated
Exactly,
network
exactly. So
to
let me bring in Gilad at this point, because and essentially what we're talking about is we're in layman's terms, we are building a mobile network inside a factory, inside a building. Yeah, so it's just what we might be used to as consumers walking around with our smartphones, but we're saying we're going to build that capability into a location. And so Gilad, yeah, picking up on what Ram's saying there, so there's a lot of technical benefits. What are you seeing from a customer use case sort of perspective? Because I mean, presumably people you're talking to and the solutions you're bringing to market are taking those characteristics, the density, the latency, the speed, etc., and they're using that for something. So what is that environment or what are the environments you're seeing that are really coming to the fore and driving this trend toward private mobile networks?
Right. So Nigel, I think that unlike some of the previous generations of cellular, 5G is coming at a very unique timing in the development of web and IT services. So if we have very few end customers or enterprises who come to us or come to our integrators saying, I want 5G and I want it to perform in an X, Y, or Z manner. That means the telecom spec, if you will, is really kind of out the door when it comes to enterprise. Enterprises, take in the industrial use case as an example, happen to be right now in a junction where they've been hearing for quite a while about the benefits of technologies such as augmented reality, AI, virtual reality, big data analytics, and they've been pressed many a times through different vendors and industries, but also coming from their CFO, in the need to modernize and optimize the way they do business. And 5G, I dare say, kind of happened to arrive roughly at the same time where all this digitization and the digital revolution is happening. In industry, there's even a specific name, Industry 4.0. But we're seeing this 4.0 happening across multiple industries. So 5G is coming at the point where enterprises are not thinking, gee, I need to improve my cellular coverage. It's coming at the point where they're saying, hey, there's a whole digital transformation that we're doing. What are the different elements that we need to put together to make that happen? And in that respect, I dare say 5G is quite lucky to arrive in this specific timing.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of pressure on 5G to perform in order to meet the very high expectation that these businesses have from this technology. And I can share with you that this experience, in order to be successful, will have to be in a sort of a journey. That means nobody's going to be able to bring all these great benefits that RAM has discussed all at the same time, all working seamlessly at one time. So it's really about a journey, about a gradual approach to delivering more and more value. But as we said, in the enterprise case, bringing value at the connectivity level is not that meaningful. What they want to see is a whole stack from infrastructure through device to application that creates value for them. And this is, by the way, where the fundamental difference is between the way that operators traditionally do business, right? Build it and they would come, over an enterprise approach that says, I'll buy it once I see the value.
Right, and the it's interesting because you say, I mean, we excuse me, we get all excited because it's 5G and it's CUs and it's DUs. The customer just wants to do something, right? And this happens to be the way they do it. So they're it's like I often say, people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'd love to buy a network. They need a network because they've got another thing they want to do with it, and that's the solution. So that, I guess, leads us into, is it possible? Or how do you go about constructing a solution that is an enterprise can recognize and understand and deploy? Because at the moment, I think, if I'm right in saying, a lot of enterprises are looking, and one of the models is for the enterprise themselves to go deploy this, right? So that presumably changes, when we're looking at delivering technology to an enterprise, we need to package it in a certain way. How do you look at that challenge in terms of how you put a product together and a solution together for an enterprise customer versus perhaps what you might do for a service provider?
Well, I think, Nigel, that at first, an enterprise is quite a broad and big word, right? There's different sizes and different expertise. So it is true that large enterprises that have big IT divisions sometimes would have an ambition to deploy a 5G private network on their own. But for the most of us, there is a mediator in the way, and that is an integrator. So typically, it would be their current IT integrator who would mediate some of the complexities to the enterprise. And sometimes it would be somebody which is ad hoc commissioned to the mission. But the installation piece, which we're always are very concerned about, we all need to remember an installation starts and ends. What an enterprise really cares about is the day two complexities. How does he manage this network? How does he scale that network? How does he make sure that the network is up to speed with his intents? And that is where the IT piece, the product piece, the one that we're so proud of building together with folks like VMware comes to play. So the installation, yes, I agree, has its complexities, but it's really about, now that I've got this network, how do I control it? And again, this is another lesson that we have learned, is that the enterprises, specifically, once they're bought in that this is a mission critical piece of infrastructure, they are coming with high expectation and hope that they would be able to manage and optimize it, and control, not to have anything hidden from them, right? Historically, enterprises dealing with CSPs had basically one choice. They could complain. They could set up some parameters of SLAs to some of their networks, but basically the only thing they could really do if something got broken was they could call up the operator and ask him or threaten him. That was pretty much the norm. Modern enterprises are accustomed now to a zero-touch experience in which they have a dashboard, they have the power in their hands, and they want to understand the governing dynamics behind the solution on one side, but they also want it to be very simple to them.
That's a good point, and also I'll come back to RAM on that if I may. Because one of the things that we're very focused on is what we often refer to as day two operations. It's one thing getting something up and running, but when you've got to live with it day to day and do all that life cycle and so on, then that can become the actual challenge ongoing. So thank you for that. Yeah, that's really insightful. And just picking up on that point about the operations and the living with it aspect of it, Ram, I mean, VMware, you're involved in a lot of solution development, and this is one example. But how do you see, or why, I suppose, why are you and the VMware team so interested in these kind of services? What is it that VMware is looking to add to enterprise and service provider services such as this? And I suspect some of it may well be picking up on that management aspect.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nigel, for asking that question, because it's very important that we understand what's going to be VMware's role in this evolving paradigm, so as to speak, right? So the days, the world is moving away from a single cloud kind of ecosystem to a multi-cloud consumption model, right? Gone are the days where it's either private cloud or public cloud kind of a scenario. Now it's all about, okay, where do I place my workload? What is the ideal place to run a specific workload? It could either be the private cloud or the public cloud or the edge cloud, right? On premise or in the telco edge even, right? So that's going to be the norm in the world going forward. So VMware's interest is primarily geared, or it's kind of centered around that concept of multi-cloud, right? We want to enable the multi-cloud consumption in a big way. And now private 5G, all said and done, even though it is primarily a connectivity service, as Gilad rightly outlined, the customers, the enterprises are looking at private mobility to realize a specific end goal. The end goal could be a predictive maintenance use case in the case of Industry 4.0, or it could be a simple remote surgeries or touchless health monitoring, like temperature sensor or things like that, touchless mechanism in the case of an healthcare industry. Or it could even be monitoring the sensors in the case of utilities like power distribution systems. So all these use cases, now when we talk about it, there is an application that goes along with the private connectivity, which needs to be run at the edge of the network. So that's where the play is for VMware. So we want to be able to facilitate the rapid adoption of this private networks, because we see an opportunity here to bring all the value additions or the value propositions that we have already been delivering in the central private cloud and the public cloud scenarios to the edge of the network as well. So we want so that our customers can easily consume all these cloud instantiations with the same set of underlying operations and management tools. So they don't need to train their IT personnel, their administration personnel on a new set of technologies, right? It's the same set of technology that we want, that they can consume and leverage all across the board. So that's the primary reason why we are extremely interested in promoting and facilitating the rapid adoption of private mobile networks.
Excellent. And yeah, so it's providing that consistency across the piece.
Yeah.
Or some of the higher order applications, if you like, which would be things like the ASOCS solutions, which would run across the platform or in a private cloud, wherever it needs to go. But that consistency of operation at the platform level would be a VMware a goal, if you like. That's what we're focused on.
Yeah.
And then the specialism of being able to deploy the network, to be able to position the mobile applications and so on, that would be overlaid on top of that, which with some of the ASOCS technology. So the combination becomes that scalable, manageable environment. Fascinating. And yes, I know there's obviously, when you move between some of the physical environments, there are technical differences, especially in mobile, with some of the underlying technical implications on operating systems and timing and so on. So there are subtleties that change as you move the platform from one location to another, but that overall consistency of process and operations persists across the piece. Excellent. So close it out, maybe just an open question. So whoever wants to have a go at this one first. So if that's what we're doing on the enterprise side, I think from what Gilad's saying, there's the potential here for enterprises or their systems integrators to help build the environment. And there's, I guess, the big question for me from a service provider point of view is how much is or should a service provider be looking to play in this? Is it Is it a hands-off approach where they provide a kind of a backhaul into their network if needed? Do they go on site and help? Do they become the systems integrator? What perhaps are you seeing, or what would you recommend the service provider should look at in terms of how to react to this opportunity?
So Nigel, maybe I can take a first shot at that.
Good.
I think we want to be fair for operators because they have a big task on their hand managing big networks, sometimes enormous, nationwide networks they're subject to many regulations. In the enterprise space, I think the dominant factor is, as Ram said, is the diversity of options. So even within which operating system, which cloud, which technology, which parameters of 5G am I deploying, which application I'm doing, the different variants are enormous. And carriers have been traditionally good at building a certain architecture, sometimes imposing it on vendors, or sometimes working with a single vendor, frankly, in some of their locations. So this is new territory for everybody. So I think the first thing that operators need to realize is that you cannot impose a specific architecture on this market because there's no one solution, and the diversity of enterprises equals around the diversity of solutions. So I think, as said, once you realize that, operators would be best in identifying the places that they can contribute value, not necessarily just trying to capture market share. And the obvious examples are the seam line between the private and the public network in certain use cases, whether they're logistical ones. It's about, as you mentioned, things that have to do with centralized management and control. So there are aspects of these networks that carriers certainly have a role in, but I think that they should be well advised not to try to impose specific solutions or architectures on a very vibrant, diversified market in this, and do try to reap the benefits. And you mentioned a very simplistic approach, which is not necessarily a wrong one, which is to provide some level of hookup or connectivity into this gigantic maze of cloud solutions.
Yeah, excellent. And Ram, you probably, I think you probably sympathise with that approach. That 'cause one of the things that we're trying to do, I know, is to increase openness, to increase agility, the multi-vendor options. So that would kind of fit in line with what you and the team are thinking as well, I guess, in terms of trying to open up architectures and give people choice.
Yes, exactly. Because different customers would probably want to go with different technologies for various reasons, right? Once you get into the private network scenario, that there is a device ecosystem that we need to be cognizant of, right? So in the macro network, it is less of an issue because we are essentially talking of iPhones and Android devices to the most part of it. So they are all, when they are launched into the market, they are already interop tested and all that stuff, right? So it's less of an issue. But once you come into the private network, now you're talking about thermometers or even security cameras, or could be humidity sensors and things like that, where there is an interoperability testing requirement that automatically self-select a specific technology on your radio side, on the RAN side, and so forth, right? So we need to be a little bit more cognizant of this reality in the private network. The other piece that I think Gilad alluded to this briefly is the regulation aspect, right? So many countries, many developing nations, OECD countries, they have opened up their spectrum for direct enterprise purchases or direct enterprise leasing. But many of the other countries, they have not followed suit. The classic case in point is Canada. In Canada, you cannot lease spectrum as an individual enterprise. You need to be recognized as a public mobile operator to lease spectrum. right? So in that scenario, in that country, if you're an enterprise, like we are in conversations with one such partner, one such customer today, they are completely ambiguous as to who provides the spectrum. But the point is, the only person who has the spectrum is the mobile operator,
Right.
so there is that element also that we need to be cognizant of, right? But I think the fundamental fact still remains the same, that the customers, the carriers, the service providers cannot treat this private network as a one size fits all story. It is a scenario where they have to be respectful of the variants that are necessary for each individual deployment, and they need to be in a position to provide choices to their customers, and that's definitely a requirement. And that's what we are trying to do with the VMware virtualization stack, because it's primarily a virtualization environment which kind of enables all these variants on a single management domain, so as to speak.
So, well, we've used up our time. It's a fascinating subject. I am going to look forward to seeing how it develops. We're starting to see private 5G evolve. We're starting to see 5G evolve. We're starting to see O-RAN evolve. So all the things that we've been talking about in some of the past episodes of Bits and Bytes, I think if anything, all we're seeing just an acceleration. Things that we thought might be slightly further out are actually pretty much with us today, and I think this is going to be another area we're going to see it accelerate. So thank you both, Gilad, Ram. Thank you for your time. So fascinating conversation. I'm really pleased you could join us. But for now, for everybody who's watching, thank you very much. Any questions, please reach out, and I'm sure the folks on the call will try and answer. For now, thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.